Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another reading wrap-up. Now that I'm doing these on a fortnightly basis, it's actually a bit easier to sit down and film them, but it does mean that I have a lot more things to talk about in one video. I think I have 15 things to mention today, so let's get into it and talk about what I've been reading. I will start with the 4 books that I'll be talking about in other videos. The first one is The Doors of Eden by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a really massive science fiction novel about a whole bunch of people who are trying to save the multiverse. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun and I really liked a bunch of the characters. Not so sure that I'm going to remember the plot in the future, but whatever. I have already done an entire review of this if you want to know more. Then there are 3 short works by Diana Wynne Jones for younger readers. The first one is Earwig and the Witch, then there is Freaky Families, and then Vile Visitors. These 3 I bought and read recently because I hadn't read them before. I didn't recognize them and was like, there are Diana Wynne Jones books out there I haven't read yet. I had actually read a little bit of these, but not all of them. So yes, there's going to be an upcoming video where I talk about all 3 of these together. The short version here is that I enjoyed these, but they're not my favorite things by Diana Wynne Jones by any means. They're definitely for younger readers, and 2 of them are more like story collections, which were a little bit more hit and miss for me. Everything else I'm going to talk about today falls into one of 2 categories. Things I didn't particularly like, and romance stories that I read to cheer myself up. I'm going to save the romance for last and just dive into the books I didn't particularly understand or like, or both. Beginning with The Snail on the Slope by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. This is an SF Masterworks edition, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do a review of this for my reading project, and then I actually finished it and thought, I have nothing intelligent or helpful to say about this book because I did not understand it. So this was a complete flop for me, unfortunately. What I gather from what other people have said about this book is that it's supposed to be like a parody or a send-up or at least a criticism of really convoluted communist bureaucracy in the USSR, circa 1950s, 1960s. And it's supposed to be really funny. I didn't think it was funny, and I didn't understand what it was talking about because I probably lacked a ton of context to understand the references, the allusions, the jokes, the metaphors, the analogies. Instead, what it read like to me was this really bizarre, almost surrealist, weird story. It didn't make any sense. It's like dual narrative. You have one man named Petrov who he's working at this like research facility, this administration that is studying this very strange forest. He wants to leave. He like wants to go to the forest, but he can never get out. He keeps trying to get rides. He gets to the edge of the forest, but he always has to go back for some reason, so he can't escape this place. And then the other storyline is a man named Candide who came from the same place that Petrov works at, but he like crashed into the forest and he was like rescued by the people living there, and now he can't get out of the forest. He's trying to get back to the city, but he can never get there either. And a whole bunch of really weird stuff happens. What was up with the buttermilk? In this translation it's called buttermilk, in other translations it's called kefir, and I'm not sure why they didn't just call it kefir in this one. Like, I know what that is, people know what kefir is, but like everybody at the place that Petrov works at, they drink buttermilk all the time. It's the thing. And then like, what are the deadlings in the forest? What is that supposed to mean? I don't understand. So yeah, I have nothing really to say about it. I don't know what else to say about this. I didn't like the character Randy. He's a rapist and he won't stop talking about his sexual exploits. Nobody likes him because they want him to stop talking about all the women he's had sex with, but nobody actually calls him on sexually assaulting and raping women. And it's like, did you not just hear him describe the story of how he and his buddies tried to gang rape a woman? Like, no. Next is Flyaway by Kathleen Jennings. I was really hoping to like this one. I have enjoyed Jennings' artwork for a while, and this is her debut novella, and the description really got me. Like this kind of dark fantasy, gothic, atmospheric story set in the Australian outback. Sure, that sounds good. And unfortunately, all I remember about this one, because most of it is just poof, gone from my head, is that it felt like it was really style over substance. There wasn't enough clarity. I didn't understand enough of what had happened by the end for it to be satisfying. So it's got this really lush, beautiful prose. It was really going for, you know, the beautiful writing. The story about a young woman trying to remember what really happened to her father and her brothers, and she's kind of being controlled by her mother, and there is a magical element that made no sense to me whatsoever. I don't know, I just kind of bounced off of it. It also has an interesting structure where like other stories get woven into it, and because it was so short, it ended up feeling less like a nested series of stories that fit together and more just choppy and like it was continually interrupting itself. I wanted it to be a little bit more straightforward, I guess. I don't know. Just, yeah, it didn't really work for me. Next is River of Blue Fire by Tad Williams. This is the second book in the Otherland series. I read the first book back in December and I enjoyed it enough to continue. I was curious about where the plot would actually go and I wanted to get some answers. Unfortunately, this is a long series of like 600, 700, 800 page books and I'm done. I can't wade through anymore. I'd always thought that the series was fantasy. It's not. It's actually science fiction. It's a little bit more like cyberpunk without the punk element. Most of the story takes place in like cyberspace, in virtual reality worlds, which I think is a really interesting idea. And it doesn't come across as too dated either. Most of the books were written in the 90s and the really early aughts, I think. So I was also surprised at how well it's aged in some respects. But pretty much it's about a whole bunch of people who are trying to figure out what is going on with this particular virtual reality called Otherland, and there are people who cannot log off. They can't get back to their bodies. They're stuck in the virtual worlds and they don't know why and they're trying to get out. There's a ton more to it than that, but I've already read like 1,400 pages of it and I don't want to try to summarize the whole thing. But River of Blue Fire was an absolute tedious slog. All of the characters show up again and they're all split into different groups and they all go through the same series of steps. It was very repetitive. People enter one virtual world and something happens to them and then they escape and they go to the next virtual world and it happens all over again. It's just this series of people being chased from one world to another and having no idea what's happening or why any of this is happening. And I was left extremely frustrated and bored. So I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to continue with the rest of the series. Maybe something will change my mind in the future. I have friends who love this series and I feel kind of bad for not liking it, but I feel like there are some really good ideas here, some really good characters, and it is drawn out and bloated with this massive word count that doesn't need to be there. So I'm not going to put myself through more of that, at least not right now. I have committed myself to finishing the Lumberjanes comic series. It is coming to an end later this year with volume 19. I'm not going to bore you guys again with my thoughts on how Lumberjanes has been run into the ground, but I am committed to actually reading it to the end because I've been saying for years that I want it to have a proper ending. I'm going to read it to find out if it has a proper ending. my expectations are not very high at this point. So I recently read volume 16 of Lumberjanes, which is called Mind Over Mettle. This one is written by Shannon Waters and Kat Lee and illustrated by AnnaMarie Rodgers. And I also read volume 17, Smitten in the Stars, also written by Shannon Waters and Kat Lee, but illustrated by Kanesha C. Bryant. I hated volume 16. I do not like AnnaMarie Rodgers' artwork. She has done work for the series in the past, and I abhor the way that she draws the characters. All the characters have these misshapen potato heads. They all look the same. They all have the same angry expressions. And it wasn't a particularly good volume to begin with. I thought the writing was kind of weak and the story felt repetitive, even though it was kind of supposed to be good character development for one of the main characters. I just didn't like it, and the artwork killed the rest of my desire to read it. All I can say about this one is that by the end of it, I had the super frowny, like angled eyebrow expression that all the characters did, and I felt like I sucked on a lemon, which is also what all the characters look like they're doing. Volume 17 was so much better, mostly because decent things happen in the plot and the artwork was great. It seemed like a return to decent writing. The characters were getting along, there were secondary characters who reappeared and I really enjoyed them, and the artwork by Bryant was perfect. It was that bold, colorful, vibrant, very much alive art style. The characters looked like themselves. It was great. I actually think this is the first time that an artist of color has worked on the series. I might be wrong, but I believe that Kanesha Bryant is Black, and she's probably the first Black person to work on this series. And I think that actually shows in the way that she drew the characters, so thank you. 2 more volumes to get through, and hopefully I won't suffer through the last 2. I'll hopefully enjoy them. Now on to books that I actually really enjoyed reading. So let's begin with The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. This is a nonfiction work, in fact a pretty academic nonfiction work, analyzing the role and portrayal of Black girls and Black women in stories of the fantastic. Thomas is talking about things that I would generally call speculative fiction, but she calls it the fantastic, and most of what she focuses on in this are examples from fantasy series, with the exception of one, dystopia. So she has this concept of the dark fantastic and this particular cycle that a lot of Black women, a lot of Black characters get stuck in with these narratives. And this is a really great book to open your eyes to how Black characters are written and portrayed. It will really make you think about this when you are reading things in the future, when you're watching TV shows in the future. I actually felt like I had heard some of her main points before, probably because I've seen the discussions around some of the characters that she talks about in this. So I didn't feel like it was incredibly new material to me, but it was still informative and educational, and I liked how Thomas pulled a lot from her own experience in fandom as a Black woman in fandom for all these various examples that she's giving. So she talks about things like Rue from the Hunger Games, both the books and the movies, Bonnie Bennett from the Vampire Diaries, Gwen from the TV show Merlin, of course Black Hermione from Harry Potter and stuff like that. And I was really happy that I was actually familiar with everything, all the examples she talked about, even if I hadn't watched a bunch of things. Like, I've seen a couple episodes of Merlin, so when she was talking about Gwen and the casting of that character, I understood what she was talking about. I've actually seen far too much of the Vampire Diaries, more than I'm willing to admit. But yeah, so I understood the examples, and I think that if somebody came to this and had simply never read any of these books or had never watched any of the shows, they might miss something, I guess. Also, they're going to be spoiled for things, which is kind of necessary for an in-depth discussion of the full story arcs of the characters. So I really felt like I got something out of this. I'm not sure I have much more to say about it, but I'm really glad I read this. And I feel like there's more of an online conversation about how Black women, Black men, people of color are portrayed in media today, like just everywhere. There's more conversations about this on social media and stuff. And obviously with Thomas's book, there's some discussion of this in academia as well. And I'm very happy about that. I think it's a conversation we need to continually have. The one thing that I wanted from this book that it never really talked about was a good example of a Black character written in a way that they escape the dark fantastic cycle. Because I think that once you've seen the examples here, it's really easy to recognize that same cycle happening in other stories. I think it's harder to identify when the cycle is broken, I guess. Does that make sense? So yeah, I would really love some analyses of works by people of color, books by Black authors. There's a lot more that you could talk about, and I would really like to hear more on that. A new T. Kingfisher novel dropped suddenly at the end of February, and I finally read it and really enjoyed it because, you know, I love T. Kingfisher / Ursula Vernon. So Paladin's Strength, this is the second in the Saints of Steel series that began with Paladin's Grace, and this series overall is about the paladins of a god who died. So they're the 7 remaining paladins, and they're kind of like rebuilding their lives and finding a new purpose now that their god is dead. And the first book focused on Stephen and him finding his one true love, and this one focuses on Istvan, who is a secondary character in the first book, and you know, he meets the right robust lady for himself. There's a lot to this series, and there's a lot to Paladin's Strength. I think it's a bit tongue-in-cheek that this book is described as a fluffy paladin romance, because yes, there is a really strong romance plotline. Istvan and Clara spend a good 2/3 of the book wanting to bonk each other, and then it takes them forever to actually do it. I thought they had chemistry. I thought they were good together, but oh my god, it took so long for them to actually talk about their feelings. Can you sense my frustration here? There's actually a lot of other stuff happening here, and in fact, I classify this as fantasy over the romance element, and there is a lot of violence and gore and some elements that are outright horrific. And it was really, really good. What I particularly liked about this one, aside from just enjoying the humor and the characters, is that it concludes a mystery from Paladin's Grace about the Smooth Men murders, and then it opens a whole other kettle of worms with the whole Moorstone, you know, like this whole city that's just crazy and about to fall apart. So this is turning into just absolute mush. I'm not making any sense now, but I really enjoyed this. It was good fun. I devoured the entire thing in 2 days, and it's almost 500 pages long. My only criticism of this book, and the reason why I didn't give it a good solid 5 stars, is that the middle part felt stodgy. It wasn't that things weren't happening. In fact, it was almost because there were too many things happening at once. There's this point, maybe at about the 60% mark, where I felt like the angst and the waiting and the anticipation on the romance side had gotten a bit too much, and then there were still so many questions and the answers hadn't started rolling in yet. I was like, okay, now I'm just reading to get through the page count for things to happen again, for some conclusions, and that felt a bit odd. I've never had that feeling with other books by Vernon before, but did not lessen my actual enjoyment of the book. I just think maybe it was a bit oddly paced in the middle. I'm gonna have a really fun time editing what I just said because I don't remember what I just said. Okay, now we're gonna end with the 4 romance novellas. I had a couple of days, actually I had an entire week this month, where I just was really mopey and then I was super anxious, and I read the romance novellas I had been saving for just a time like that. So I read 2 novellas by Rebekah Weatherspoon. The first one was Fit, and this one I liked in a general sense because I like the characters and I like the premise of it, but I did not like the BDSM dominant submissive aspect of it. It's basically about a woman who works in like reality television on like cooking shows who wants to get fit, and after having a terrible time in a like all ladies workout class, she's referred to a personal trainer who has a softer touch, and he's attracted to her, she's attracted to him, and he decides to motivate her fitness journey with sex. And there's a whole dom sub aspect to it. I read this specifically to see how I felt about the BDSM element because it's very light and gentle and done well here, and I did not react well to it. I got like 30 pages into this pretty short story and was like, I don't know if I can keep reading this. I really don't like it. I don't like the dynamic in the sex scenes. So I finished it, and it was good, just part of the sexy times was absolutely not for me. Then I read Xeni, also by Rebekah Weatherspoon. This is the second in the Loose End series that began with Rafe, and I raved about that one a couple of weeks ago. So I came into this with pretty high expectations, and it was kind of meh. This one follows Xeni, who basically inherits her very wealthy aunt's estate, as well as a number of secrets coming to light. And in order to get her inheritance, her aunt's will says that she has to marry this guy named Mason for 30 days. Mason is also going to inherit a large chunk of cash, so they decide a marriage of convenience to get their money is not the worst thing in the world, so they do it. And they are attracted to each other, but not really ready to commit. Both of them are dealing with a lot of intense emotions and family drama. But they like each other, so will they stay married or not? I think my main problem with this one is that I didn't particularly love the drama. There's a lot of family tension in the background, and sometimes not even in the background, like that's kind of the story. And it stressed me out a little bit. Xeni in particular is really upset through a lot of this, and she needs catharsis. She needs to be able to hang on to somebody and cry if she needs to. And so I really felt that. But some stuff going on with her family and some of the revelations and the way that like her parents deal with it and stuff, I just was left feeling kind of stressed out, which is not how I wanted to feel during a romance novella. There was a happy ending though, so yay. Then I finally returned to the Ravenswood series by Talia Hibbert and read the last story in that I hadn't gotten to before, which was the novella Damaged Goods. This follows a secondary character from the very first book. I've completely forgotten her name, I'm sorry. She is the ex-wife of the bad guy in the first book. She's pregnant and she finally leaves her husband. She wants better for herself. She's escaping the toxic environment, the toxic relationship. She heads out to like this beach house to live. She's gonna have her baby on her own, and she runs into this guy that she had a teenage romance with, and their sparks fly once again. He's a really good guy who's very supportive of her, and I feel like this whole story was about second chances, another chance for these people to come together and have the good relationship. I enjoyed this for what it was, but I didn't feel very invested in it. It was mostly just a sweet story. And lastly, ending on a really high note, I read Can't Escape Love by Alyssa Cole. I have read all of the novels in the Reluctant Royals series now. I read them earlier in the year, and my favorite one is the second one, A Duke by Default, which follows Portia as she meets her Scottish Duke. I really enjoyed that, and her sister, her twin sister Reggie, is the focus of Can't Escape Love, and that's why I really wanted to read this one. I thought Reggie was so interesting, and I wanted to see their family and her relationship with her sister from Reggie's perspective. So I got that in this one. But this is about how Reggie, she basically reaches out to this guy who is live streaming puzzles. She was the only person to ever watch his live streams, but she tracks him down and wants him to record his voice so that she has something to listen to so she can fall asleep, because he's basically got like an ASMR worthy voice. And he's like, that's a little bit creepy. I'm not gonna record things for you, but how about if I just call you and we talk on the phone? And she's like, yes. And then they progressively get closer and closer and then find out they live really near to each other. They get together. And I am describing this so badly. I liked these two so much and they fit together so well. I mean, I already knew that I liked Reggie, but you get more of a sense of her personality and like her strength and her bluntness, and she asks for what she wants, and I really like that about her. She's also a complete and absolute nerd. And then Gus is like my favorite person ever. He is autistic, which is talked about a little bit in this, but he's really into puzzles, and his job during this story is that he's designing an escape room based on an anime that Reggie is a huge fan of, and of course she has to sit down and watch it with him and explain it to him. But I just thought he was so great. He was so observant and he paid attention to details. He was genuinely such a kind-hearted person, and he fit so well with Reggie. It was almost 5 perfect stars, guys. I was so into it, and it ended very abruptly. So it's like 4.5 stars. It could have used another 10 pages to bring things to a more gradual, more satisfying end. This is kind of my complaint with a lot of romance novellas now. They end a bit more abruptly than I want them to, but whatever. This is one I will read again in the future, just when I need a pick-me-up. And that is it. Those are all the things I've read in the past 2 weeks. I'm now very talked out and I need to get some more tea, so I'm gonna end this here. Let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you want to, leave me a comment down below, and I'll be back to talk to you guys again soon. Bye.